Great idea, terrible execution. Aldnoah Zero is frustratingly disappointing. You will be hard-pressed to find a single review of this anime that ends with a glowing recommendation. And outside of the review space, I'd wager the majority of people who sat down and watched this thing don't remember much aside from the last 20 seconds of the first episode. And maybe the ending, because it wasn't very good. And you could say the same thing for the entire series, though I suspect a handful of people still cling to the laughable notion that this show was at one point pretty good. And don't feel bad if I've included you, because that was me too up until like a couple weeks ago. Now, why am I reopening old wounds covering an anime everyone made their peace with a decade ago? Well, it's getting a compilation film at the end of the month and a new special in March for some reason, so I figured this was the perfect time to revisit Aldnoah Zero to see just how bad things truly are. Spoiler alert, it's pretty bad. Aldnoah Zero takes place in an alternate version of history, where the Apollo crew found a hypergate on the moon that led to Mars, which happened to be the home of some ancient civilization that is long dead and gone. But they left behind their tech and this power called Aldnoah, which can make a bunch of cool stuff happen. So people started to settle on Mars and formed a feudal society based on blood magic, and eventually declared a war on Earth in 1999, because it turns out Mars doesn't have much in the way of resources. But it ended inconclusively after that hypergate on the moon blew up, which left the Martian army stranded in their space castles, leading to a tentative peace between the two sides. Nothing happened for the next 15 years until the Martian princess Salem comes to Earth on a peace visit and gets blown to pieces herself by Terran terrorists, allegedly, which reignites the war. The only thing is, she didn't actually get assassinated, but her faithful orbital knights don't know that, except for the ones who were behind the attempt, and they used it as justification to conquer the Earth, or at least the parts they didn't already blow up. Meanwhile, a walking, talking plank fresh out of high school discovers the princess is still alive, and these two crazy kids team up and try to end this silly war once and for all. That is the general story of Aldnoah Zero, which translates into a series of skirmishes between Plank and the mecha of the week. Now, the main gimmick is that the Martians are incredibly advanced and will basically steamroll any opponent in a straight-up fight. Each Martian mech has a broken, unique ability, and Plank has to survive long enough to figure out an exploit. But even though the actual method employed by Plank changes every time, the fights can start to feel repetitive, because it's just the same setup over and over again. A lone Martian shows up, the main military force gets obliterated, and then Plank saves the day with science and proceeds to explain everything to the audience in his deadpan voice. I don't mind these explanations, but after a while, it starts to come across as the show trying desperately to convince you it's smarter than it truly is. Just like it's also trying desperately to convince you it's darker than it really is. Because when you start to break down the fights, you'll notice that they throw in a bunch of scientific terms and names to distract you from what's actually happening on screen. Every fight is as follows. A group of Earth tards stand still and shoot at a target that doesn't take any damage until one of them says, hey, that thing's not taking any damage. At which point they will stand still and shoot at a target that doesn't take any damage until they all die. Or they run straight towards the enemy until they all die. To break up the status quo, the fights eventually move away from the standard single Martian versus a group of Terrans, and you might think that would make the fights more interesting because all the new variables would provide for unique and potentially tense situations. But it really doesn't. CGI in anime has always been contentious. Some people hate it, some people don't care that much about it, and some people actually like it, or so I'm told. I've always looked at CGI as a promise from the anime that I will see something really cool eventually. And the only reason that the thing I'm seeing right now is CGI is because its cool capacity was never that high to begin with. So they elected to leave this part neglected in the animation department so that the scenes with the highest potential to look really awesome look really awesome. The problem here, as you've no doubt noticed, is that pretty much every mecha in Aldnoah Zero is CGI in every fight, and it's not good CGI. These machines come across as stiff and awkward and overall just out of place, and it makes the action scenes fall flat. Luckily, the show is able to compensate somewhat by relying on pretty digital effects and a banger soundtrack, but even those things come with their own issues. The soundtrack, for instance, while of good quality, which should be expected given who made it, uses a handful of tracks way too often. Keep On Keepin' On effectively operates as Plank's main theme, and it comes up in virtually every episode, always around the time he enters the action. Same thing happens with the Princess theme, which plays basically basically anytime she talks, and the variation of her theme which plays basically anytime the other princess talks. Now these are good songs, but the show could have done with some variety in the song choice, especially because most of the other songs in the OST are great, and you could easily swap out these tracks for something that still fits the scene. But back to the CGI and the visuals. I don't think this is a bad looking show. The character designs are easy on the eyes, the backgrounds are filled with detail and care for the most part, and the lighting always complements the environments. But I don't think there's anything amazing going on with the 2D animation that would offset the disappointing use of CGI. Even when we do see 2D robots in a fight, they don't really do anything, which leads me to believe that the only reason they're 2D this time is because they barely move, so there's no need to blow the budget on any animation. But I believe that most of the visual shortcomings of Aldnoah Zero would have been ignored or excused if the show had decent writing. Unfortunately, it does not. But before we get into that,
I gotta get paid too.
This video is sponsored by Tokyo Treat. Tokyo Treat is a fun and exclusive Japanese snack box containing all different types of unique full-size snacks, and it's all delivered to your Minecraft home in real life. Each box follows a theme, and what's inside the box changes depending on this theme. What I have here is the box for March, and the theme is Cherry Blossom Bites. Since spring is just around the corner, it's only fitting to have a collection of Sakura-related treats, which includes a Sakura donut. Always a pleasure to get a Japanese donut, and this one comes soaked in some Sakura syrup, which makes it even more delicious than before. Or how about some sour plum salt crackers? They're crunchy and puffy and packed with flavor. But if you're looking for more variety in the flavors, then you gotta go with the Senbei Spring Mix. It's like Japanese trail mix, very good. But the best Japanese thing will always be those Kit Kats you can't find anywhere else. And this time, there's strawberry shortcake. There's a bunch of other stuff too, like onion puffs, peach mochi, Sakura petal marshmallows, a Sakura blossom cake, and some Hakata tonkotsu ramen. I feel like I've watched something with that name. Oh, right, the cross-dressing Hitman anime. Okay, it's coming back to me. It's actually pretty good from what I remember. There's also a packet that comes with the box that explains certain cultural phenomena, and occasionally you might even get an anime recommendation. Believe me, there is a lot to look at here. Like, a lot. Oh, this must be the wife store I've heard so much about. Be sure to get a box for yourself or as a gift for someone else. You can sign up for a subscription for one of these boxes and get $5 off your first box by clicking the link in the description below and using my code. This does help the channel out, and now, back to the video. Aldnoah Zero is something that I really do want to enjoy because the premise had promise, but little did I know the show had its sticky little fingers crossed behind its back. It does its best to make the worst decisions regarding its characters, story, and world building every single time. Any interesting concept is followed by something stupid, or it's completely forgotten, only to be remembered by some random guy on a forum writing the show after the fact. Who built the Hypergate? Was it made by the same civilization that lived on Mars? Are we ever going to find out who they were and what happened to them? Guess not. I can't even find anything about these guys on the wiki except that Aldnoah is like the Force from Star Wars?
That's not how the Force works.
Aldnoah Zero tries to deal with heavy topics like racism and classism and militarism with all the subtlety of Kanye on Twitter. It is impossible to take the Orbital Knights seriously when they act like actual cartoon villains, which would be fine if the show didn't insist on being so serious. It wants you to view things in shades of gray. This is why there are two main characters on both sides. We have one protagonist who shows the Terran perspective, and another for the Martian perspective. But there is no legitimate reason to view the Martians as anything other than comically evil. I'm a little offended by the depiction of racist in this show. We do not act like this. The way that these ideas are incorporated into the story does not fit with the timeline we're given. Mars wasn't colonized until the tail end of the 70s, and the show takes place in 2014. Is that enough time for people on Mars to start thinking that the people of Earth aren't human? Both Martians and Terrans are completely physically indistinguishable from one another, because they are exactly the same, and the show is aware of this. It points it out a number of times, and yet for some reason, the Martians view Terrans as a completely completely separate species, as something more akin to a dog than a man, even though every single one of them has a parent or a grandparent who is a Terran, and probably still alive. I mean, the first Emperor of Mars was born on Earth, and he's still alive and respected at the time of the Second War with Earth, so why is it that Slain, a Terran who fights for Mars after being saved by the royal family, is mistreated at every turn just because he was born on Earth? And it makes even less sense because he's not just an average Terran. His father is a respected scientist who came to Mars to study Aldnoah under the Emperor. Are they just jealous that he has some royal favor with the princess? Because you could just go with that. But no, it's all Terran this and Terran that because the show is worried that if it doesn't constantly beat you over the head with the message, you're not going to realize it's trying to say something. And that something is, racism is bad. War is bad. We should just not do those things. This is the kind of writing we're dealing with. Concepts are included with no regard to how they might fit the world built by this show or the story it's trying to tell. And people just say stuff for no good reason or do things that make no sense. Every episode is filled with questions that never get answered, not because they're trying to build a mystery, but because they have no idea what the answer is. And that's probably because they didn't think that far ahead. All they were thinking about was, how do we make something cool? They didn't care if it didn't make sense or if it confused the tone or just looked silly because they didn't think you cared. That is why when a character who lost his home and several of his friends because of the Martians, a story that is all too common given that the Terrans are potentially on the edge of extinction, meets with the figurehead of the Martian cause to let out his anger and grief, he just laughs it off cause she's cute. Really? That's what we're going with? Okay. It's so frustrating at times because without fail, they will get close to doing something interesting and then just abandon it for something safe and surface level. The princess got choked out and her heart stopped, which means the ship powered by her royal blood is offline? What are they gonna do? That ship was their only hope of fighting on the same level as the Martians. Now they're screwed. Never mind, she's fine now. And I guess no one cares about the little girl who tried to kill her cause she's sad? Oh no, the main villain just shot the princess in the face, and then he got shot 3 times point blank by Slain, and then he shoots Plank in the face. I can't believe it. What's gonna happen now? Never mind, everyone survived. Oh, wait a minute, Plank has a special eye now, and it runs on artificial intelligence, and it's growing each episode, slowly consuming his humanity, until it seizes the moment and assumes total control over the body. Never mind, nothing happens, he's fine now. Why do this? Why not commit to anything? These ideas, they're not even bad, they just need some tweaking. You can even just move stuff around, like move the princess back to tank to right after the choking incident. The early episodes already established the rules of Aldnoah and how it needs the person who activated the engine to stay alive for the thing to stay active. So why does the show never do anything interesting with that? Something like having Plank and his buddies keep the princess on life support for the sake of the mission. This would raise the tension as well as possibly some moral questions in the future and explain why Slain shoots Plank in the face at the end of season 1 for using the princess as a means to an end. Because as it stands right now, I really have no idea why he does that. And then just imagine what would happen in season 2 when the other princess starts pretending to be her sister. Now the Terrans will have a choice. Do they potentially sacrifice their best weapon to make the real princess, who might just be able to expose the truth, or maybe recruit more knights to their cause, or do they keep her alive but unconscious and try to win the war on their own? On a side note, I have no idea why they brought in the doppelganger tech, and then never have either princess claim the other one was a fake, because one is a secret child of the Emperor, so she still has the special blood, and the other one isn't politically savvy, so she doesn't know the ways of intrigue and court politics. Do you realize how common that was in our timeline? I know the show knows about the Russians, okay? Give their history a little read. Maybe I'm wrong, but that all sounds way more interesting than an AI eye with cheat codes that gives Plank a tactical advantage over his enemies, but is slowly turning him into an analytical zombie. Wait, that's just how he always acted. But even when it assumes total control over his body, he's back to normal in like 5 minutes because God forbid we do something interesting with the main character. I'm not gonna break down every dumb decision in this show, but I think you get the point that Aldnoah Zero employs cheap methods to keep people coming back with a bunch of manufactured hype. This started off as the realistic mecha anime, but they couldn't commit. They got selective with the realism. It'll take the time to explain why the sky is blue, but it'll forget that guns are really, really loud and have a character fire a round off right next to her ear indoors with no one reacting or losing their hearing. Normally I wouldn't complain about this sort of thing, but you opened the door because you showed me that you were smart enough to have everyone covering their ears in pain because they stood too close to a mecha when it started shooting. Or did the show only think that happens with really big guns? You see, it understands that a military values communication, so the first thing the Martians do when they invade Earth is take out all the satellites and the fiber optic cable on the ocean floor, cutting off basically all communication on Earth. But then it never goes out of its way to properly establish just who the United Earth military even is, where they operate, and what tech they have at their disposal. And I guess it didn't need to because that military is seemingly wiped out by the second episode until it magically returns in season 2, just like the people who were supposed to be dead. I can see why a lot of people got hooked on the first few episodes. Sure, it had its narrative problems and an over-reliance on badly handled exposition, but it tried to be grounded and tragic. People died in that show. It killed off one of the main character's friends to establish that the characters were not safe. And then it never killed another one again. It morphed into this unserious thing where the main character always wins, and even when he loses, he really doesn't. And actually, he just gets even stronger. Now, I realize I haven't dedicated much time to Plank or most of the other characters, but that's because these people are nothing. Plank is a void of charisma and emotion. I have no idea what makes him tick or drives him to do the things that he does. He likes eggs. That's textbook character writing, I think. There is something interesting here, but it feels like it gets lost along the way. Plank is a very logical character. He doesn't express his emotions often, or really at all, which is completely opposite to Slane, who is almost always all emotion. It's interesting to see this savior of humanity who barely acts human, and contrast that with a more lively person who might just destroy a good chunk of humanity. That's a cool dynamic that sort of loses itself in season 2 when Slane starts to become colder and more calculating, and less emotional, at least on the surface, while Plank just stays the same. But I think this happened because the show failed to realize how interesting this dynamic really was, which is why other characters around Plank will always tell you how much he's changed instead of the show showing you that change. Or they'll tell you how Plank is feeling instead of leaning into him not feeling at all. Now, I'm not saying that he should have been a psychopath, but it would have been more interesting that way. And I feel like this is kind of there. His nonchalant attitude towards death and destruction might be better described as a casual kind of callousness. There's one point towards the end of the first season where he asks the princess, when does a war end? And she replies with an answer that's driven by emotion. But Plank responds by stripping away the emotion and laying things out logically in a cold tone, ominously ending his answer by claiming the only way for a war to end, besides one side achieving their goal, is when so many people are killed that it is no longer economical. Forget psychopath, the show should have made him a war criminal. I mean, once you view him in that light, some of his actions and his lack of emotional responses feel a lot more satisfying. Plank's friends are similarly underutilized. I don't even know the names of like half of these people. There's one chick who's a Martian and she's pretty edgy and sad and like 12 or something. That guy's a drunk dealing with PTSD. This lady's the captain. This other one is Plank's older sister. The Knights, they're there. Pretty much all the same personality-wise. Oh, there's the princess. She's about what you'd expect from an anime princess. There's just nothing to these people that makes them interesting or fun or, characters. And the small few who do have something going for them are squandered in this story. And it all builds to one of the most unsatisfying conclusions out there. The war ends once the princess reveals that she's still alive again, and that the other her was a fake, which is a claim that goes uncontested and everyone just believes her for some reason. And that she's getting married, not to Plank or Slane, but to some guy who only showed up in the last 3 episodes. Everything bad that happened is pinned on Slane, and he's officially declared dead, but Plank still keeps him company because the princess asked him nicely to do just that. They clearly tried to make a tragedy here, but it just plays out like a travesty. I'd argue the series would have been more tragic if Slane actually won, but the princess died, resenting the man that he became. So he lives out the rest of his life as an unhappy god emperor who has the world and and the stars above, but can't fill the hole left in his heart, even though he's married to a girl who loves him so much she's willing to pretend to be the woman he loved. But what do I know about storytelling? The only thing I write are terrible tweets. That's not to say there's nothing to enjoy about this anime, but the stuff that's good is only surface level. Everything to love is right there on the top, built on pillars and pillars of bad writing. Which surprises me because this story was written by Gen Urobuchi, a guy who's written stuff I and many others really enjoy. Now that's not to say his every work is without its flaws, but this is such a step down from Fate Zero, even though both anime have the same writer and director. It has its moments where you can see the magic, but the scenes don't feel connected. It's like a patchwork of predefined moments clumsily stitched together by a series of contrivances and nonsense. And then you read a little further and discover that Urobuchi only wrote the premise and the first couple of episodes and then dipped out, leaving the characters and the rest of the series script to the other writers. Now it all makes a lot more sense. I don't know if I'll ever understand why this anime still holds a relatively decent score on my anime list. Am I just being overly critical? Do I need to stop being so pseudo-intellectual and just enjoy it for what it is? I feel like I can do that with plenty of other shows. I mean, I'm not opposed to just turning my brain off and enjoying the pretty colors, but when I see something that could have been so much more, I can't help but complain. Anyway, until next time, Ave Maria, Deus Vult, and a big thank you to all the cultured.